You weren't chosen because you were weak. You were chosen because you could feel. In every family that cannot face its own pain, one member is silently selected to carry what everyone else refuses to acknowledge. This isn't conscious. No one votes. But somehow, inevitably, one child becomes the emotional repository for everything the system cannot hold. If you were that child, you already know. You felt it before you could name it. That sense of being different, of absorbing something heavy with no clear source, of walking into rooms and immediately sensing the temperature of everyone's unspoken feelings. You became the family's emotional weather vane, constantly rotating to detect which way the storm was coming from. The role is assigned without ceremony. In the small moments, the way your emotions are dismissed while others are validated, the way conflict somehow circles back to you, the way your presence agitates something beneath the family's peace. You become the one blamed, criticized, marked as the problem child. Perhaps you were the one who cried too easily, felt too much, asked uncomfortable questions. Perhaps you were the one who wouldn't pretend everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Perhaps you simply had the misfortune of being born at a time when the family system needed someone to carry what was becoming unbearable for everyone else. But you weren't chosen randomly. Families unconsciously select the member with the greatest capacity to feel, the most sensitive, the one whose nervous system is attuned enough to register what others ignore. The one who looks into the mirror of the water sees first of all his own face. The child becomes the mirror reflecting everything the family refuses to see about itself. The unprocessed grief, the hidden rage, the shame no one will speak, the disappointment beneath achievement, the fractures in the facade. You absorbed it all. Not because you agreed, but because your system was permeable enough to let it in. This wasn't weakness. It was the beginning of your initiation into a different way of seeing. In those early years, you couldn't understand you were being shaped. You only knew something felt fundamentally wrong, that you were somehow responsible for tensions you didn't create. The family maintained its homeostasis by making you the container for its shadow. If you're feeling recognition so deep it aches, know this: nothing was wrong with you. You were responding accurately to an inaccurate situation. Your sensitivity wasn't pathology, it was perception, and what felt like a curse was actually the beginning of your transformation. Before we dive deeper, if this resonates with your soul's journey, please hit that like button and subscribe for more transformational content. Your support helps this message reach other souls who need to hear it. Long before you had words, your body knew. Your nervous system became the first oracle reading signs your conscious mind was too young to interpret. This is where the gift begins, in the hypervigilance others call anxiety, but is actually extraordinary intelligence. Do you remember scanning faces before entering a room? Learning to predict storms by the quality of silence, reading your parents' mood in how they closed a door or their footsteps on stairs. This wasn't paranoia. This was survival wisdom. Your body became a sophisticated instrument for detecting emotional weather. A slight shift in tone told you whether the evening would be peaceful or explosive. A particular quietness meant danger was gathering. Even laughter carried information. You distinguished genuine joy from mockery, disguised as humor. Every family dinner became a masterclass in emotional translation. You learned to track multiple people's states simultaneously, to sense the undercurrent of tension between parents even as they spoke about ordinary things, to feel when someone had hurt behind a smile, to know before anyone spoke that something had shifted in the household's emotional field. You might remember specific moments, the way your stomach would tighten when you heard a car door slam a certain way, how you could tell from the sound of footsteps whether you should make yourself visible or invisible, how you learned to read the meaning in the space between words, in the length of a pause, in the particular quality of a sigh. This constant vigilance carved pathways in your nervous system. Your limbic system learned to pattern recognize at speeds bypassing conscious thought. Where others could afford oblivion, you had to stay alert. The limbic system doesn't distinguish between emotional and physical threat. The unpredictability of emotional atmospheres felt as dangerous as physical harm. So you learned. You adapted. You became extraordinarily attuned to the invisible currents moving between people. This wasn't a disorder. This was your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do in an environment where emotional safety was inconsistent. The problem wasn't your sensitivity. The problem was needing this level of vigilance to navigate daily life. Your body was reading the family's shadow before your mind could name it. Every micro-expression, every shift in energy, every incongruence between words and feeling, your system cataloged it all. This is the foundation of what you'd later recognize as empathic ability. Not mystical. Neurological wisdom forged in necessity's fires. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Your personality was being transformed daily through constant contact with projected emotions and denied realities. Your nervous system was learning a language most people never need to speak fluently. While this vigilance was exhausting, it was also cultivating in you a perceptual capacity that would one day become your greatest strength. You were learning to read not just what people say, but what they mean. Not just what they show, but what they hide. There's a particular exhaustion that comes from being the emotional regulator of an entire family system. You learned this young, though you had no name for it. You were managing, absorbing, mediating, holding. This is the invisible labor of the scapegoat child. You learned to shrink when tension rose, as if making yourself smaller could absorb the pressure. You learned to be preternaturally aware of everyone's moods, adjusting your presence accordingly. You learned to modulate yourself constantly. And the cruelest part, your own emotions became illegitimate. When you expressed hurt, you were too sensitive. When angry, you were disruptive. When you expressed need, you were demanding. The message was clear: your feelings didn't matter. Your job was to absorb feelings, not have them. This created a psychological split. You became hyper-aware of everyone else's internal state while losing touch with your own. You could sense your mother's hidden grief across a room, but couldn't name your own loneliness. You existed in participation mystique, unhealthily fused with the emotional states around you. You might have found yourself apologizing for things that weren't your fault, taking responsibility for other people's moods, believing that if you could just be better, quieter, more helpful, more invisible, then the family would finally find peace. You learned to contort yourself into whatever shape seemed required in the moment, losing track of your own authentic shape in the process. In early years, you had no ego boundaries firm enough to resist this fusion. You couldn't distinguish between what was yours and what belonged to others. When your mother was anxious, you felt anxious. When your father was disappointed, you felt you had failed. This is what made the burden so heavy. You weren't just witnessing dysfunction, you were metabolizing it, taking it into your body and trying to transform it into something manageable. You became the family's emotional digestive system. But here's what's also true. This impossible burden was secretly teaching you. In learning to sense everyone's emotions, you developed extraordinary emotional intelligence. Your exhaustion wasn't proof of weakness. It was proof you were carrying weight that never belonged to you. You weren't too sensitive. You were accurately reading a dishonest environment. In families where truth cannot be spoken, a different language develops. The scapegoat child becomes fluent in this wordless communication. They learn to read the spaces between sentences, the meanings hidden in pauses, the volume spoken by what is carefully left unsaid. You learn that silence itself is information. Not all silences are the same. There's comfortable silence of people at ease. And there's loaded silence of things that cannot be mentioned. The silence that hums with tension. The silence that feels like held breath. You learn to read all of these with precision. Because in your family, the most important information was rarely spoken aloud. Feelings weren't discussed. They leaked out in sighs and slammed doors. Conflicts weren't addressed. They lived in the quality of eye contact or careful avoidance of certain subjects. This is where you developed the third ear. The capacity to hear not just words, but the emotional truth behind them. When someone said they were fine, you heard the tremor beneath that meant they were breaking. You learned to trust the subtext more than the text. Most people listen to words and take them at face value. You learned young that words are often protective barriers thrown up between the speaker and their actual truth. So you listened deeper, to tone, to rhythm, to what the body said, while the mouth spoke something different. This made you different. While other children could accept surface explanations, you were always sensing the layer beneath. You couldn't unhear what you heard, couldn't pretend everything was fine when you could feel it wasn't. This created its own loneliness. You were perceiving a reality no one would acknowledge, seeing the emperor's nakedness while everyone else admired his clothes. And when you tried to name what you sensed, you were told you were imagining things. So you learned another silence. The silence of keeping your perceptions to yourself. Of knowing what you know, but not speaking it, because speaking brought punishment. The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it. You were learning that meaning lives beneath the surface, that what matters most is often what goes unspoken, that truth has its own frequency. There comes a moment when something fundamental breaks. It's when you realize that love, as you understood it, will not save you. That no amount of goodness, achievement, or self-sacrifice will change your role in the family system. This is the collapse of innocence. At first you tried so hard. You believed if you were perfect enough, they would see you. If good enough, they would love you without conditions. So you performed. You achieved. You made yourself small. You became whatever seemed required. But there's a devastating moment when you realize it doesn't matter. Nothing you do will change the fundamental dynamic. You are not loved for who you are. You are valued for the role you play. And that role is to be the container for what the family cannot face. This realization accumulates through 1,000 small betrayals. The times you succeeded, and instead of celebration, there was criticism. The times you were hurt and your pain was dismissed. The times you needed support and found only judgment. The times you dared to be authentic and were punished. Each time you reached out for connection and found only conditional acceptance. Each time you thought you'd finally done enough to earn real belonging, only to discover the goalposts had moved again. Each small betrayal is survivable. But together, they build to a breaking point. And then one day you finally see clearly, I am not safe here. Love in this place comes with unbearable conditions. I will never be enough because the problem isn't who I am. The problem is the role I've been assigned. This is the death of the eternal child who believes in the fundamental safety of the family. This innocent self dies, and with it dies a certain hope. The hope that if you just wait long enough, try hard enough, things will change. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. And this pain is excruciating. It's the pain of orphaning yourself while your family still lives, of recognizing that the people who were supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. You grieve in this moment. You grieve the family you wished you had, the childhood you deserved but didn't receive, the unconditional love you needed but were never given. But here's what's also happening. You're seeing clearly for the first time. The protective fog of innocence is lifting. The denial that helped you survive is dissolving. and beneath it, reality reveals itself. This is the beginning of your own authority. When you can no longer believe the family's version of events, you're forced to trust your own perception. When the illusion collapses, truth has room to emerge. Your heart breaks open in this moment. But broken open is different from broken apart. Broken open means cracked wide enough for light to enter, cracked wide enough for truth to flow through. In the aftermath of collapse, something unexpected emerges. The very betrayal that broke your heart also opened your eyes. You begin to notice things you couldn't see before. Contradictions that were always present, but you were too loyal to acknowledge. This is the development of critical sight. Where once you accepted things at face value, now you examine. Where once you believed what you were told, now you verify against your felt sense. You start seeing the incongruence everywhere. Your mother says she loves you while her eyes remain cold. Your father claims everything is fine while his body radiates tension. Your sibling apologizes but repeats the same harm. For someone not trained in perception, these contradictions might pass unnoticed. But you've been apprenticed in reading beneath the surface. And now, with protective filters of innocence removed, you see with painful clarity. Love and cruelty can come from the same person. Care and neglect can coexist. This recognition of contradictions is part of the integration of opposites. Most people split the world into good and bad. They need people to be one thing or the other, because holding complexity is uncomfortable. But you're learning that humans are not simple, that the same person who wounded you also sometimes loves you. This capacity to hold paradox is rare. It requires psychological sophistication most people never develop. It means sitting with the tension of two truths that seem to contradict. Yes, my mother loved me. And yes, my mother harmed me. Both things can be true simultaneously. In learning to hold these opposites, you're developing a maturity of vision that serves you far beyond your family of origin. You're learning to see people as they actually are, complex, contradictory, capable of both beauty and cruelty. The wound is the place where the light enters. Your heart broke open, and through that opening, truth could finally flow. The pain of betrayal cracked apart your need to see your family as all good or all bad, and in that crack, a more nuanced vision emerged. Where wisdom reigns, there is no conflict between thinking and feeling. You're learning to let your thinking and feeling inform each other, to think about what you feel and feel into what you think. This integration is what creates discernment. And discernment is your protection now. Not the false protection of believing everyone is good, but the real protection of seeing clearly and responding accordingly. The scapegoat child has no choice but to become intimate with shadow. They are thrust into contact with the parts of human nature others can pretend don't exist. Rage, addiction, cruelty, mental illness, neglect. These aren't abstract concepts for you. They're the daily weather you learn to navigate. While other children could be sheltered from these darker aspects, you were immersed in them. You witnessed what happens when people cannot face their own pain. You saw how unprocessed trauma repeats across generations. You experienced firsthand how someone's refusal to look at their own shadow means that shadow gets projected onto someone else, usually onto you. The shadow is everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. Every quality we deny, every feeling we repress, every truth we cannot face. In a healthy system, individuals work to integrate their own shadow. But in a dysfunctional system, the shadow is cast onto one member who is forced to carry it for everyone. You became the family's shadow carrier. Their anger lived in you. Their shame manifested through you. Their fear of inadequacy projected onto your achievements. You were the screen onto which everyone else projected what they couldn't bear to see in themselves. You were forced into an alchemical process most adults never undergo willingly. In alchemy, there's a stage called the nigredo, the blackening. It's the necessary descent into darkness, the confrontation with what has been denied. You were thrust into the nigredo as a child. But here's what this forced confrontation gave you: an unflinching capacity to witness the full spectrum of human experience. You cannot be shocked by human nature because you've already seen its depths. This is where compassion is born. Not saccharine surface-level compassion from privileged distance, but deep embodied compassion that comes from recognizing your own capacity for darkness. Because you were forced to face shadows so young, you had to reckon with your own. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is perhaps the most important teaching for the developing empath. The goal is not to be pure or good or light. The goal is to be conscious. You learn this through necessity. You couldn't afford the luxury of denial. You couldn't pretend darkness didn't exist when you were intimate with it daily. You had to learn to look directly at what others turned away from. And in learning to look at others' shadow without flinching, you also learn to face your own. This self-honesty is brutal, but it's also liberating. Because when you can acknowledge your own darkness, you're no longer at its mercy. This is what gives you the ability to see others without judgment. You recognize the wounded child beneath the rage. You understand the fear hiding inside the control, not because you're making excuses, but because you've done your own shadow work. There is a peculiar gift in being pushed to the margins. When you're exiled from the family's collective illusion, you gain something most never achieve: objective perspective. From the outside looking in, you can see the whole system in a way insiders cannot. Those comfortable inside the family structure have an investment in maintaining it. They benefit from the current arrangement. They need the family narrative to be true, because questioning it would destabilize their identity, so they don't look too closely. But you were pushed out of that comfortable center. You were never allowed to fully buy into the family mythology. Your experience consistently contradicted the narrative. And so you were forced to see the gap between what the family claimed to be and what it actually was. This is the beginning of individuation. This separation from the collective unconscious. This movement from accepting inherited beliefs to questioning them. From being defined by your role to discovering who you are apart from it. The exile is lonely at first. You watch your family continue in familiar patterns while you stand outside seeing things they refuse to acknowledge. You try to point out what you see, but they cannot hear you. From the margins, you notice patterns insiders cannot perceive. You see how the same conflicts repeat with different surface details. How each generation inherits unresolved trauma. How certain topics are systematically avoided. You see your family system the way an anthropologist sees a culture. With distance, with clarity, with the ability to identify patterns and dynamics that those inside the culture take as natural. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And exile paradoxically gives you permission to discover this. When you're no longer trying to earn your place in the family structure, you're free to ask, who am I beyond this role? These questions are the beginning of authentic selfhood. They're uncomfortable because they separate you further from the collective. But they're necessary if you're to become an individual, rather than simply a role in someone else's story. Exile strips away false belonging. It forces you to distinguish between connection based on authenticity and connection based on compliance. It teaches you that not all belonging is worth the cost. In the loneliness of exile, you begin to build a relationship with yourself. Not the self the family created, the scapegoat, the problem child, but the self that exists beneath those projections. There comes a moment when everything shifts. When you realize that what you've been carrying isn't a burden to be rid of, it's a gift to be understood. Your sensitivity isn't pathology. Your perceptiveness isn't paranoia. Your ability to sense what others cannot is not a curse. It's the very foundation of your purpose. This awakening emerges gradually as you begin connecting the dots between your painful past and your present capacities. You start to notice that you can walk into a room and immediately sense the emotional climate, that you can sit with someone and know what they're feeling before they speak it, that you can hear the unspoken needs beneath people's words, that you can sense when someone is hurting even when they're smiling. These aren't supernatural abilities. They're the natural result of your training. Years of having to read emotional atmospheres for survival have developed in you a perceptual sophistication most people never acquire. Your nervous system was trained in the laboratory of family dysfunction. What was once a survival mechanism has matured into a genuine gift. This is the emergence of the empath understanding that Carl Jung, empath, and personal development are deeply interconnected. Let's be clear about what empathy actually is. It's not sympathy, which is feeling sorry for someone. Empathy is the ability to sense and understand another person's emotional reality, to perceive their inner experience with accuracy, to feel into what they're feeling without losing yourself in the process. You have this capacity because you were forced to develop it. What began as a survival mechanism has become something more. You can now use this perceptual ability, not just to protect yourself, but to understand others deeply, to see through their defenses to the wound beneath. This is the gift of the wounded healer archetype. The one who has been wounded gains the ability to recognize and respond to the wounds of others. Your broken places have become places of sensitivity and strength. But here's where we need to pause. Being an empath requires boundaries. Without boundaries, empathy becomes enmeshment. You begin to lose track of where your emotions end and others begin. You take responsibility for feelings that aren't yours to carry. Healthy empathy means feeling with, not feeling for. It means sensing another's emotional reality while remaining grounded in your own. It means being able to hold space for someone's pain without trying to fix it, witnessing without absorbing, perceiving without drowning, understanding without taking responsibility. This is the difference between wounded empathy and integrated empathy. Wounded empathy says, I must save everyone. I must carry everything. If someone is hurting, it's my job to make them feel better. I'm responsible for managing everyone's emotional state. Integrated empathy says I can witness your pain. I can sit with you in it. But I cannot carry it for you. Your feelings are yours to process, and mine are mine. I can be present without being consumed. Learning this distinction is essential. Because without it, your gift becomes your undoing. You burn out. You become resentful. You lose yourself in the constant attempt to manage everyone else's emotional reality. You forget that everyone has their own journey, their own lessons, their own capacity for healing. The shoe that fits one person pinches another. You must learn to trust that people have their own paths, their own timing, their own process. The awakening of the empath is the awakening to power, but it must be power with wisdom, power with boundaries. This is where the principles of Carl Jung, empath, and personal development converge in the most important way. Your development requires learning to honor your empathic capacity without letting it consume you. Now we arrive at the most challenging part of the empath's journey, facing your own shadow. Here's the truth: you cannot heal others if you refuse to see your own wounds. You cannot hold space for another's darkness if you're denying your own. The scapegoat who becomes the empath often falls into a trap. Having been cast as the bad one for so long, there's deep relief in finally being seen as the sensitive one. the healer. It feels like redemption. But this can become its own false identity, a new role to hide in. And if you're not careful, you start using your empathic identity to avoid your own shadow work. You focus on everyone else's pain to avoid facing your own. True empathy requires ruthless self-honesty. It requires looking at the ways you too can be manipulative, the ways you use your perceptiveness to control outcomes, the ways your empathy can be a subtle form of superiority, the ways you might use your gift to avoid looking at your own life, the ways you focus on others' problems to distract from your own unhealed places. These are uncomfortable truths, but they're necessary ones, because every human carries shadow. The question is not whether you have shadow, everyone does. The question is whether you're willing to look at it, whether you're willing to acknowledge that you too are capable of harm, that you too have blind spots, that you too sometimes use your gifts in ways that serve your ego rather than serve others. Facing your own capacity for cruelty and harm is humbling. It shatters any illusion of being somehow better than the messy reality of human nature. And that shattering is exactly what's needed. When you can acknowledge your own shadow, you stop projecting it onto others. I'd rather be whole than good. This is the heart of shadow integration. The goal is not to be perfect or pure. The goal is to be conscious of your full self, to see clearly both your light and your darkness. For the empath, shadow work is essential because without it, your empathy becomes distorted. You might use it to rescue people who haven't asked to be rescued. You might use your sensitivity as a reason to avoid direct communication. These shadow patterns need honest examination, not to berate yourself, but to become more conscious, to recognize where your empathic capacity comes from genuine service and where it comes from an unmet need of your own. The process of shadow integration is ongoing. It becomes a practice of continual self-examination, of asking, what am I not seeing about myself? Where am I being dishonest? And here's what's beautiful: as you become more honest with yourself, you become more genuinely helpful to others. Because you're no longer caught in the trap of thinking you need to save anyone. You understand that people have their own shadow work to do, just as you have yours. When you've done the work of facing your own shadow, when you've developed boundaries around your empathic capacity, then something remarkable happens. Your vision clarifies. You become not just an empath, but a seer. A seer is someone who sees beyond surfaces to essence, who perceives not just what people present, but who they actually are beneath their defenses, who recognizes patterns across systems and generations. This is not mystical. This is the result of deep psychological work combined with refined perceptual ability. You see things now that others miss. You notice when someone's words and energy don't align. You sense when someone is performing rather than being authentic. You recognize repetition compulsions, the ways people unconsciously recreate their original wounds in current relationships. This sight is a gift, but it's also a burden. Because once you see, you cannot unsee. Once you perceive these deeper patterns, surface conversations feel hollow. You're aware of everything not being said beneath the pleasantries. This can be profoundly lonely. You're seeing a reality most people don't perceive or don't want to acknowledge. You try to share what you see, but often people aren't ready to hear it. So you learn discernment about what to speak and what to hold in silence. You learn that not everything you perceive needs to be said, that sometimes your role is simply to witness, to see clearly, without requiring others to see what you see. There's a responsibility that comes with seeing clearly. You recognize you could use your perceptiveness to manipulate, that you could exploit vulnerabilities. The temptation exists to become the one who knows who holds power through insight. This is where ethics becomes central. Your gift is meant to liberate, not to control, to illuminate, not to expose. The difference between a healer and a manipulator is often just a matter of intention. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. This is the essence of the seer's wisdom. The external vision comes from internal vision, from having looked deeply into your own heart. The seer is not someone who stands above or apart from humanity. The seer is someone who has descended into their own depths and emerged understanding that everyone is struggling with their own shadows, carrying their own wounds. This creates a particular quality of sight, one that's clear but compassionate, that sees the fullness of human nature and holds it all without flinching or turning away. This is the vision that heals. The journey of transformation is not complete in isolation. At some point, the one who has been exiled must return. But they return changed. They're no longer the scapegoat trying to earn belonging. They return as an individuated being who knows who they are, regardless of how they're received. This return is not about reconciliation in the conventional sense. It's not about going back and pretending nothing happened. It's about stepping back into relationship with family, with community, with the world, from a place of groundedness rather than neediness. You return to your family system, but you're no longer of it in the same way. You can be present without being absorbed. You can engage without being enmeshed. You can love without losing yourself. This is the fruit of all the work you've done, the shadow integration, the boundary development, the cultivation of self-awareness. What's remarkable is how your presence alone shifts things. You're no longer reactive to the old triggers in the same way. When someone tries to bait you into the familiar dance of blame and defense, you don't take the bait. When someone projects onto you, you can observe it without absorbing it. When the family system tries to pull you back into your assigned role, you remain anchored in who you actually are. You're no longer playing your assigned role, and your refusal to engage in the familiar dance disrupts the system. You've become what's called a transitional character, someone who breaks the generational pattern, who says, "This ends with me." The dysfunction, the projection, the unconscious harm, you will not pass it forward. This is not a small thing. This is revolutionary. Because family patterns have momentum. Your refusal to participate in the old dynamics is an act of profound courage. But returning to the world is not just about family. It's about stepping into your life with the fullness of who you've become. It's about bringing your hard-won wisdom into your work, your relationships, your creative expression. You discover that you create safety simply by being grounded. The people relax around you because you're not performing or pretending, that your authenticity gives others permission to be authentic. This is the healer's presence. Not doing, but being. Not fixing, but witnessing. You become a living example of what's possible when someone does the deep work of transformation. And perhaps most importantly, you've learned to navigate relationships with discernment. You're no longer available for dynamics that require you to abandon yourself. You're no longer willing to participate in relationships where you must wear a mask. This means some relationships end. Some people cannot accept you as you actually are. And when you're no longer willing to play the role, they drift away. This is painful, but it's also clarifying. Because what remains are the relationships based on genuine seeing. The people who want to know you, not the role you play. This is what Carl Jung, Empath, and personal development ultimately creates a whole human being stepping into their power. Now looking back over the journey, something becomes clear that wasn't visible in the midst of pain. The wound was never just a wound. It was an initiation, a terrible one, an unwanted one, but an initiation nonetheless into a particular kind of seeing that cannot be taught any other way. You were not punished. You were prepared. This doesn't make the harm okay, but it does mean your suffering was not meaningless, that something was being forged in you through those fires. This is the paradox at the heart of the wounded healer. The wound is what creates the capacity to heal. The breaking is what creates the spaciousness to hold others' pain. The exile is what creates the clarity to see truly. The question becomes, what will you do with what you've been given? Will you remain bitter? Will you use your wounds as reasons to withdraw or harm others? Or will you transmute your suffering into service? The psyche is teleological. It moves toward wholeness. Even in the midst of trauma, something in you was reaching toward integration, toward consciousness. The wound was part of that process. This doesn't mean we romanticize suffering. But when suffering comes, we can choose to let it destroy us or let it refine us. We can choose to remain victims or become students of our experience. You chose the latter. Somewhere along the way, you made a choice to learn from your pain rather than be imprisoned by it, to grow through your wounds rather than calcify around them. And in making that choice, you've become something rare and valuable. You've become someone who can sit with others in their darkest moments without trying to fix them or flee. Someone who can see people's shadows without being frightened or judgmental. Your wound has become sacred not because pain is sacred, but because of what you've done with it. You've refused to let it make you cruel. You've refused to pass it forward unconsciously. You've allowed it to crack you open to compassion, to wisdom. The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it. Your suffering has meaning because you've given it meaning, because you've allowed it to teach you, because you've transformed it from a wound that weakens into a wound that strengthens. Understanding the journey is one thing. Living it is another. So let's get practical about navigating the world as an integrated empath. First, energy management. You need to become conscious of when you're carrying energy that isn't yours. Throughout the day, pause and ask, what am I feeling right now? Is this mine? Or did I pick it up from someone else? When did this feeling start? Was it after that phone call? After that meeting? After scrolling through social media? Learn to discharge energy that doesn't belong to you. Physical movement helps. After intense emotional interactions, go outside. Walk. Let your body process and release. Water is clarifying. Let the shower wash away what isn't yours. Nature is grounding. Put your bare feet on earth. Lean against a tree. Breathe fresh air deeply. These aren't just nice ideas. They're essential practices for maintaining your energetic integrity. Create clear boundaries around your time and attention. Just because you can feel everyone's feelings doesn't mean you're responsible for them. Your empathy is a gift, not an obligation. You are not a 24/7 emotional support system for everyone in your life. No is a complete sentence. Practice saying it without justification or apology. Your empathy might make you sensitive to disappointment, but managing other people's disappointment is not your job. Learn to recognize boundary violations, even subtle ones. Someone who consistently expects you to manage their emotions is violating your boundaries. Someone who gets upset when you don't intuit their needs is violating your boundaries. You don't have to fix them or teach them. You just have to hold your line. Discernment becomes your daily practice. Is this my feeling or theirs? Is this true intuition or projection? Your empathic ability can be accurate, but it can also be distorted by your own unmet needs. Always verify. Check your intuitions against reality. Just because you sense something doesn't automatically make it true. Hold your intuitions lightly. Be willing to be wrong. Let people show you who they are. In relationships, choose people who honor your sensitivity rather than exploit it. Red flags include emotional dumping without reciprocity, expecting you to read their mind, punishing you for not preventing their upset. Someone who says, "You should have known I was upset," is asking you to be responsible for their internal state. Someone who consistently overshares their problems but never asks about yours is using you as an emotional dumping ground. Someone who gets angry when you set boundaries is telling you they value their comfort over your well-being. Green flags include emotional responsibility for themselves, clear communication, respect for your boundaries, reciprocal care. People who say, "I'm feeling upset about something, can we talk?" rather than expecting you to detect and manage their moods. People who thank you for your insight without becoming dependent on it. People who give as much as they receive. You're allowed to curate your intimate circle. You're allowed to limit contact with people who consistently drain you. Empathy doesn't obligate you to unlimited access. Compassion can exist alongside distance. Build in recovery time after intense interactions. If you're naturally empathic, social situations take more energy. Honor that. Schedule downtime after gatherings. Protect your solitude. And please develop healthy selfishness. Take care of yourself first. Not in a narcissistic way, but in a sustainable way. You cannot pour from an empty cup. Self-care isn't selfish. It's the foundation that makes your service possible. One of the most profound gifts that emerges from the scapegoat's journey is the capacity to break generational patterns. You've seen the patterns clearly. You've felt their impact intimately. And now you have the consciousness and courage to say, "This ends with me." Family patterns have momentum. They've been repeated for generations. Your grandparents learned certain ways of relating. They passed this template to your parents. Your parents, despite best intentions, recreated versions of what they experienced. The pattern wanted to continue through you. It expected to continue through you. But you've become conscious. You've done the work to see the pattern rather than simply live it. And consciousness is what breaks the spell. When you can see how dysfunction operates, you can choose differently. When you understand the wounds driving the behavior, you can heal rather than repeat. The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents. Your parents carried their own unhealed wounds. Some of that got projected onto you. This is not about blame. This is about understanding. They did the best they could with the consciousness they had. This means you get to choose how you show up in relationships, how you handle conflict, how you communicate needs. You're not limited to the template you were given. If you become a parent, this is where your work matters most. You will not raise your children the way you were raised. You will not use them as containers for your shadow. You will see them as full human beings with their own paths. This doesn't mean you'll be a perfect parent, but you'll be a conscious one. When you mess up, you'll own it. You'll repair. You'll model what it looks like to acknowledge harm rather than deny it. That modeling is everything. But breaking generational patterns is not just about future generations. It's about how you show up now. In your friendships, in your romantic relationships. Are you recreating familiar dynamics? Are you playing the same role in a different setting? Becoming conscious means catching yourself when you're about to repeat the pattern, when you're about to take on responsibility that isn't yours, when you're about to accept treatment that isn't acceptable. In those moments, you have a choice. Sometimes breaking patterns feels like betrayal. Your family might interpret your growth as disloyalty. This is the system resisting change. The pattern wants to continue. You might feel guilty for choosing differently, for setting boundaries your family never set, for prioritizing your well-being over their comfort. But this guilt is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're breaking old programming. Because here's the truth, when you heal yourself, you heal the lineage. This is the essence of Carl Jung empath and personal development transformation that serves not just the individual, but the collective. Your healing ripples backward and forward in time. It releases your ancestors from patterns they couldn't break. And it frees your descendants from having to carry what you've resolved. You become a transitional character, the one who transforms the family story. This is not small work. This is sacred work. This is choosing consciousness over comfort, truth over tradition, health over habit. So what is your purpose now? What are you meant to do with this hard-won wisdom, this refined sensitivity, this capacity to see what others miss? First, release any notion that your purpose is to save others. That's the old pattern disguised in spiritual clothing. Your purpose is not to fix everyone or prevent everyone from experiencing pain. Your real purpose is simpler and more profound, to live authentically and allow that authenticity to ripple outward, to embody integration and let others witness what that looks like. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Your presence, when you're grounded in your authentic self, creates a field others can feel. You don't have to do anything. To do. Simply being who you are is the medicine. Some empaths are called to formal helping roles, therapy, coaching, teaching. If that's you, your gift serves you well. Your ability to perceive beneath surfaces makes you extraordinarily effective. But many empaths serve in quieter ways, by creating safe homes where people can be authentic, by maintaining friendships where depth is welcomed. Purpose doesn't always look like a grand mission. Sometimes it's simply showing up as a whole human being. Your specific purpose will match your specific wound. What you went through prepared you for something particular. The exact nature of your suffering corresponds to the exact nature of your gift. Someone who experienced abandonment might become exceptional at creating genuine belonging for others. Someone who experienced invalidation might become gifted at truly seeing people in their fullness. Someone who experienced chaos might become skilled at creating islands of stability and peace. Pay attention to what people naturally come to you for. What do friends seek from you? What feels effortless to you that seems difficult for others? What do people say you helped them with, even when you weren't trying to help? These are clues to your particular medicine, your unique contribution to the healing of the world. But whatever form your purpose takes, remember, you are not meant to sacrifice yourself. Purpose that requires your continual self-abandonment is not true purpose. Real purpose nourishes you, even as it serves others. The integrated empath understands they're most useful when well-resourced. That maintaining their own well-being is not selfish, but essential. That boundaries are not barriers to service, but the structure that makes service sustainable. Your purpose includes enjoying your life, creating beauty, experiencing pleasure. You are not here to be a martyr or a saint. You're here to be a full human being who happens to carry the gift of deep perception. And perhaps most importantly, trust that your presence is enough. You don't have to prove your worth through endless service. You matter simply because you exist. Your purpose flows from who you are when you're being yourself completely. We come now to the end of one journey and the beginning of another. The transformation from scapegoat to seer is not a destination, but a continuous unfolding. There is no moment when you arrive completely. Instead, there is deepening, refining, ongoing integration. The final liberation is liberation from the story itself. You are not just the scapegoat. You are not just the empath. You are not just the wounded healer. You are a multifaceted human being whose identity extends far beyond any single archetype. The self is larger than any single identity. You contain multitudes. You are more than what happened to you, more than your wounds, more than your gifts. Don't let even your healing journey become a prison. This means you get to have moments of not being wise, days when you're not particularly empathic, times when you just want to be shallow and silly. You're allowed to be imperfect, contradictory, still growing. The work of integration never makes you finished. It makes you more fully human, which means gloriously complex and beautifully imperfect. You've learned to hold paradox, to be strong and vulnerable, to be wise and still learning, to see clearly and remain humble, to love deeply and maintain boundaries, to care profoundly while also caring for yourself. These opposites don't contradict, they complete each other. This is what wholeness actually looks like. Not perfect, not finished, but integrated, conscious, awake. The peace that comes with integration is not the peace of having everything resolved. It's the peace of accepting what is, of no longer being at war with your sensitivity, of relaxing into your nature rather than fighting it. You're no longer apologizing for your depth, no longer pretending to be less perceptive than you are, no longer dimming your light to make others comfortable. You've stepped fully into yourself, and that's the liberation. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, and also the most freeing. You've faced your shadow, you've owned your wounds, you've acknowledged your capacity for both harm and healing, and in accepting all of it, you've become free. Free to show up authentically, free to set boundaries without guilt, free to love without losing yourself, free to see clearly without being burdened, free to feel deeply without being overwhelmed, free to be fully human in all your complexity. This is what the journey has created. A person who can stand in their truth without aggression or defense, who can hold space for others without collapsing into them, who can see shadow without being consumed, who can love widely while remaining whole. You were never broken, you were always becoming. The scapegoat was never a punishment, it was an initiation, a brutal one, an unfair one, but an initiation nonetheless into a particular quality of consciousness that cannot be achieved any other way. And now you are the one who can hold both the wound and the light, who can see truly and love deeply, who can walk through shadow and bring back wisdom, who can bear witness to suffering without being destroyed, who can offer presence without pretense. You are the seer. You always were. Even when you didn't know it, even when you were drowning in the role of scapegoat. The gift was being forged in you all along. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. And you have chosen. You have chosen consciousness over unconsciousness, integration over fragmentation, truth over comfortable lies, growth over stagnation, love over fear, authenticity over approval. This is the final liberation. Not from your past, you carry that with you integrated now. Not from your sensitivity, that's your gift. The liberation is from the need for anyone else to understand your journey, from the hope that your family will finally see you clearly. You know who you are now. You know what you've walked through. You know what you've become, and that knowing is enough. So step forward now as the person you've become, the one who was scapegoated and survived, the one who was wounded and transformed, the one who carries sight as a gift rather than a burden, the one who loves with wisdom and lives with courage. You are free, not because nothing binds you, but because you've integrated everything that tried to break you. You are whole, not because you're without wounds, but because you've made your wounds holy. This is your liberation. Welcome home to yourself.